While still eating, Bertu looked at Yi Chen with a serious expression and advised him not to cause trouble that day. He cautioned him to remain vigilant, as he was already in a dangerous position, and Wu Changqing was not an opponent to be taken lightly. Yi Chen only chuckled softly, pretending to be afraid. Yesterday's auctioned items were all spirit artifacts, and according to the rules of the Yuming black market, all auctioned items for today were spirit artifacts. Elder Yang, standing before the assembled bidders, announced the commencement of the auction. Producing a scroll, he presented it as the One Yang finger, explaining that its name derived from the cultivation method of condensing Yang True Qi into a single finger. He added that cultivators with fire attributes might find it compatible. The starting price was set at 50,000 spirit stones. Bertu immediately bid 60,000. He began to declare that he would pay, but was abruptly interrupted by a smug-looking individual who declared that his Qi family would pay 200,000. Bertu cursed under his breath, lamenting that he had intended to compete. Yi Chen observed that cultivation families possessed great wealth and that such amounts of spirit stones were insignificant to them. A wealthy-looking woman bid 210,000, followed by a young man who raised it to 250,000. The bidding continued rapidly: 300,000, 400,000, 500,000. Bertu leaned over the table in resignation, stating that the auction was over since the others possessed far greater wealth. Yet before despair could settle, he reacted with sudden astonishment as a bid of 550,000 echoed across the hall. Upon recognizing his second uncle's voice, relief and delight crossed his face, and Yi Chen declared with renewed spirit that hope still remained. The bidder from the Qi family cast a sharp look toward the new bidder, remarking that Xing Dashan displayed impressive audacity. Xing Dashan, amused and unbothered, answered with an unflinching smile, asserting that the man was free to compete if he dared. Observing the tension, Yi Chen quietly asked Bertu whether hostility existed between their families. Bertu confirmed that the enmity was long-standing, tracing back to their grandfather's time, born of a contested heavenly spirit stone mine that had driven both sides into unending conflict. Elder Yang's voice rose above the crowd, declaring that the One Yang finger technique would go to the Xing family for 550,000 spirit stones. Without pause, he revealed the next scroll: the Tianggang staff array, a technique crafted for staff and rod users. He set the starting price at 30,000, allowing increments of 1,000, and invited new bids. Yi Chen expressed visible enthusiasm, prompting Bertu to question his interest, since Yi Chen was not known for staff cultivation. Yi Chen, however, reasoned inwardly that the skill would benefit Hua rather than himself. Around them, the other bidders dismissed the array as overly complex and impractical, muttering that a sword art would have been worth their attention instead. When no bids followed, Elder Yang prepared to close the lot. At that moment, Yi Chen announced his intention to purchase it, offering 31,000 spirit stones. A new voice then rang out from behind the curtains on the second floor, bidding 40,000. As Elder Wu came into view, he declared their sect's interest in the technique. Recognizing Elder Wu's voice, Yi Chen felt a spark of irritation, noting that Elder Wu had shown no interest until he himself had bid, only to appear now in deliberate challenge. As Elder Yang prepared to conclude the sale at 40,000, Yi Chen interrupted once more, smiling as he boldly raised the offer to 100,000 spirit stones. A ripple of surprise spread through the hall. The other bidders exchanged murmurs, astonished that someone would once again challenge Wu Changqing. They recalled how, only the previous day, he had relied on his Zhenyang sect's authority to flaunt his strength, only to end up humiliated in the end. Elder Wu raised the bid to 150,000 spirit stones, prompting Yi Chen to counter with 200,000. The sudden escalation startled Bertu, who urged Yi Chen to stop. But Yi Chen stood, instructing Bertu to get his 300,000 spirit stones prepared, which only deepened Bertu's alarm. The amount had barely been warmed on his balls, and now it was being risked again. Seeing this defiance, Elder Wu demanded whether Yi Chen understood whom he was challenging. Yi Chen responded that the auction was governed by fairness and that the highest price should prevail, implying that Elder Wu's warning sought to intimidate others. Amused by his audacity, Elder Wu laughed loudly before increasing his offer to 250,000. But before he could declare it, Yi Chen struck the table and doubled the price to 500,000. The impact of the bid rippled through the hall. Conversations broke out as the other bidders expressed disbelief that anyone would drive such a price for a staff technique. Some mocked the contest, noting that the youth dared to contend with the Tianggang sect. Others compared it to the previous day's farce, calling it another reckless waste of spirit stones. The ridicule only aggravated Elder Wu. The higher the commotion grew, the more intolerable it became for him to retreat. Having already lost face the previous day, conceding now would be another humiliation, not only to himself, but to the Tianggang sect as a whole. Another elder muttered that his insistence on competing over a worthless technique had already cost him his dignity. Elder Wu slammed the table and began to declare his intent to pay, but Huiyun intervened, urging him to reconsider. He advised against wasting spirit stones on a technique of little worth and reminded him that their true goal was the heaven-desolate pill. The interruption only intensified Elder Wu's fury. Unable to vent his anger inside the building, he ordered his men to find Yi Chen and vowed to make him suffer for his audacity. Huiyun bowed in acknowledgement of the order, just as Elder Yang's voice resounded across the hall, announcing that the Tianggang staff technique had been sold to the young friend for 500,000 spirit stones. Bertu lamented that he was once again penniless, muttering curses under his breath and declaring that he might have to beg the second master for funds. In response, Yi Chen assured him that he would repay the 300,000 spirit stones in full, with interest, at a later time. At those words, Bertu's eyes lit with sudden vigor. With an eager grin, he quickly jotted something down, asserting that mere promises carried no weight without proof. Holding up the paper with self-satisfaction, he insisted that Yi Chen sign it as a formal pledge of debt. Yi Chen stepped back with both hands raised in protest, refusing to comply as Bertu advanced, waving the paper like a warrant. Across the hall, Elder Yang's voice resonated as the great doors swung open, announcing the end of the day's auction. Yet, Bertu remained relentless, pursuing Yi Chen toward the exit while shouting that he must sign before leaving. Yi Chen retorted that he would do no such thing, ordering him to stop following. Bertu accused him outright of planning to renege on his word. From a nearby corner, two elders observed the commotion with evident amusement. One of the elders remarked that the young man possessed a remarkable spirit. The other laughed and added that, compared to how old Sidhu had been in his youth, the young man's temperament was even better. Not far from them, the young woman in elegant robes offered the elders a playful glance, teasing them to take it easy during the next day's auction. Ahead, Yi Chen sighed in exasperation and told Bertu that he would write the IOU later. He flatly refused to touch the paper, pointing out that Bertu had pulled both the paper and pen from his crotch. Bertu scoffed at the complaint, retorting that the spirit stones he had lent came from the same place, and Yi Chen hadn't objected at the time. Yi Chen was about to argue further when his attention shifted what's ahead of him. There, Lu Zi appeared, walking with measured grace and faint amusement curling at the corner of his lips. The sight made Yi Chen's expression harden. Within him stirred the buried anger toward the man who had once crippled his meridians, an old wound that time had not dulled, and a debt that would one day demand repayment. From the second floor, two figures from the bloodthirsty palace descended, only to stop as the young one inquired whether Elder Ji had sensed a familiar aura emanating from the youth below, referring to Yi Chen. Elder Ji explained that the youth was concealing his qi, prompting the young man to advise vigilance and to consider whether they might have encountered him before. At that moment, Yi Chen collided with Elder Wu, his expression shifting to one of surprise. Elder Wu immediately issued a grim threat, promising a horrific death. Unfazed, Yi Chen continued on his path, brushing past their group while wearing a slight smile and responding with a taunting retort, expressing mock fear and inviting the elder to act. As he moved, Yi Chen paused briefly, his eyes locking with Ningxuang. She experienced a sudden sense of familiarity, puzzling over his identity. A door then swung open, and Elder Yang stepped out, addressing Yi Chen with amusement about the commotion he had caused, leading Yi Chen to reply with a modest deflection. Smiling, Elder Yang extended an invitation for Yi Chen to join the Profound Sect. Yi Chen reacted with visible shock, questioning the sincerity of the offer and downplaying his own abilities as merely at the qi condensation stage. Elder Yang clarified that cultivation level was not a barrier, as the sect valued talent and potential, acknowledging an interest in Yi Chen's true fire, but emphasizing his broader capabilities. Curious, Yi Chen inquired whether membership would require complete separation from the Great Chu dynasty and non-participation in its affairs. Elder Yang confirmed that sect rules, established by past masters, forbade involvement in the disputes of the Great Chu's major forces. Before Yi Chen took his leave, Elder Yang added that his offer was always open. Yi Chen gave a respectful acknowledgement, expressing gratitude and stating that he would indeed consider the offer. When Yi Chen departed, Elder Yang addressed an unseen presence nearby. He spoke into the quiet, addressing the chief master, wondering aloud why, among the many gifted individuals within the Great Chu, they had invited this one youth alone. As the previous elder stepped forward, Elder Yang continued asking, wondering if it was due to Yi Chen's possession of a heavenly fire. The chief master rejected the assumption with deliberate clarity. He declared that the reason lay deeper, that Yi Chen was far from ordinary. His talent might not rank highest among the prodigies of the Great Chu, yet he was fundamentally different. The heavenly fire he carried was not a common heavenly flame, and beyond that, something far more significant rested within his bloodline. Slightly uneasy, Elder Yang proposed consulting the Lord Sage for guidance. The chief master sighed, wiping his forehead, and lamented the difficulty of doing so. The Lord Sage, he complained, had left the sect to him and wandered off to enjoy leisure, her whereabouts entirely unknown. Meanwhile, Yi Chen had already reached the crowded streets of the Yuming Black Market. As he moved through the bustle, he became aware of the Zhenyang sect's disciples trailing behind him. Yi Chen smiled to himself, doubting their ability to track him effectively. He pretended not to observe them, reflecting inwardly that they had not bothered to investigate his background. While appearing to browse, he recalled that he had once been part of the Zhenyang sect's information pavilion, trained precisely for such work. Inwardly mocking their inexperience, Yi Chen gazed at them with a smile before vanishing instantly before their eyes. The disciples of the Zhenyang sect froze, eyes widening as realization struck. They had lost him. As they rushed towards his previous location, Huiyun and Ningxuang arrived at the same stall, their attention drawn to the doll left on the table. The shopkeeper scratched his head in confusion, muttering over the sudden disappearance of his customer. Huiyun studied the scene with measured concern, acknowledging that the youth was far from simple. Ningxuang considered another possibility, that while his cultivation might indeed surpass theirs, he could also belong to an intelligence division, one skilled enough that ordinary disciples could never hope to keep pace. Upon returning to his room at Shenjuin, Yi Chen reflected that though the 500,000 spirit stones he had spent pained him, the cost was justified if it allowed Hua to learn the art. Settling down, he studied the staff technique before him and concluded that the expenditure had indeed been worthwhile. Staffs, like spears, stood among the most difficult of spiritual weapons to master. The Tianggang staff array laid out the profundity of staff combat in full detail, outlining its principles and numerous practical methods. It divided the array into offensive and defensive forms, uniting both aspects into a single, profound technique. When brought to perfection, even the shadow of a staff's movement could generate formidable arrays, ranking it among the rarest of staff-based profound arts. As Yi Chen meditated, a vortex of light gathered around him. He recognized that the art was far from easy to learn. The Tianggang staff array required using the staff's shadow movements to shape offensive and defensive formations. His eyes began to glow as he brought his sword forward in a swift slash, wondering whether the same principles could be applied to swordsmanship, to form an offensive and defensive sword array through the sword's shadow instead. The swirling light intensified as he continued to strike through the air. Each motion of the blade caused the vortex to tighten around him. He reflected that all weapons beneath the heavens possessed their own strengths, yet ultimately led toward the same mastery. As the radiant flow of energy circled his sword, he compared the various weapons: spears, swords, halberds, staves, maces, axes, and bows, and found their essence similar. Resolute, he declared his intention to master not the Tianggang staff array, but the Tianggang sword array. Watching the energy spiral ever closer and studying the blade in his hand, he affirmed that time posed no obstacle. What was required was perception. At dawn, the entrance of the hidden dragon pavilion stirred with noise and movement as a voice carried across the gathering crowd. It remarked that the first day's auction had featured spirit artifacts, the second had been devoted to profound techniques, and that on this third and final day, the pavilion would present its collection of spirit pills. Inside the grand establishment, Yi Chen sat beside Bertu, the latter once again eating with unabated enthusiasm. Yi Chen studied the list of items for the day, noting that the pills selected for auction appeared extraordinary. Bertu, chewing as he spoke, confirmed that sentiment and explained that the final pill of the day might well reshape the balance of power across the Great Chu. As Yi Chen pressed for more details, Bertu's tone lowered as he leaned closer, speaking with a mix of excitement and nervousness. He asked if Yi Chen was familiar with the heavenly immortal stage. Yi Chen replied that it was the 6th stage of cultivation, the peak of mortal advancement, and that any cultivator who reached it would stand unmatched for thousands of years. Bertu agreed and, after a brief pause, revealed the identity of the final item to be auctioned: the heavenly immortal pill. Bertu continued, elaborating that the Great Chu contained countless powerful sects and clans, many boasting cultivators who had already reached the half-step heavenly immortal stage. A number of them stood at the very pinnacle of that realm, while a rare few had managed to ascend into the heavenly immortal stage itself. The pill to be auctioned, he explained, could serve as a catalyst for those on the brink, allowing a half-step heavenly immortal cultivator to advance completely into the next stage. He predicted that the day's auction would become intensely competitive. The patriarchs and ancestors of every major power, his own Qing family included, had lifespans that were nearing their limits. Each would covet the heavenly immortal pill as a final opportunity to extend their lives and achieve a breakthrough. He noted that cultivators at the half-step heavenly immortal stage could live for roughly 5 centuries, while those who achieved the heavenly immortal stage could survive for 1,000 years. He added that anyone living so long without succumbing to madness would be a rarity indeed. Gesturing toward the 2nd floor, Bertu pointed out that the private rooms above stood empty. The true bidders, he said, had already altered their appearances and blended in among the ordinary crowd on the 1st floor. Yi Chen glanced upward, questioning the reason for such behavior. Bertu answered that the heavenly immortal pill was far too precious for anyone to reveal their identity once it was acquired. Those who sought it would rather remain hidden than risk becoming known as its possessor. Unbeknownst to them, an elder on the 2nd floor was observing the duo. Bertu expressed the opinion that, if, for example, the Bloodthirsty Hall were to obtain the heavenly immortal pill, then following the auction, this faction would likely be pursued and targeted by numerous forces. He asserted that even if those forces failed to eliminate them, the major powers of the Great Chu would almost certainly unite and launch a northern campaign against the Bloodthirsty Hall. He further noted that the same outcome would apply if the pill were acquired by any one of the 3 sects or the leading families. Yi Chen concluded that a violent conflict outside the Yuming black market was inevitable following the auction. Bertu agreed, remarking that in theory this would indeed be the case. Consequently, he explained, the major powers participating in the auction would make every effort to conceal both their appearances and their qi, in order to avoid identification. Yi Chen then observed that the Profound Sect's decision to auction the heavenly immortal pill appeared to be a deliberate attempt to incite conflict among the major powers of the Great Chu. He remarked that the sect's conduct seemed duplicitous. Bertu dismissed the concern, stating that individuals would go to great lengths for the sake of the pill, and that ultimately, it was a matter of whether one could secure it safely. He pointed out that no one was being forced to make a purchase. Yi Chen surmised that the leading experts from various factions had likely already concealed themselves outside the Yuming black market in preparation. He noted that to align with the strong, one must avoid becoming isolated. Bertu responded by acknowledging Yi Chen's perceptiveness. Upon realizing the danger, Yi Chen abruptly questioned why they were still lingering in the area and insisted that they leave at once. He argued that once the auction concluded and conflict erupted, individuals of their standing would be caught in the crossfire and quickly eliminated. In response, Bertu resisted being pulled away, arguing that with everyone focused on seizing the heavenly immortal pill, no one would bother with people like them. At that moment, the doors closed, and Elder Yang appeared, holding a box. He announced the start of the auction, presenting the bone-constructing pill. He stated that its medicinal effects required no further explanation, set the starting price at 50,000 spirit stones, and specified that each subsequent bid must increase by no less than 1,000 spirit stones. The bidding commenced immediately, with initial offers rising rapidly from 50,000 to 60,000, and then to 80,000. The bidding proceeded with offers rising to 100,000 spirit stones, followed by a bid of 150,000. Elder Yang inquired whether any further bids would be made. Receiving no response, he declared that the bone-constructing pill had been successfully sold to the bidder, who offered 150,000 spirit stones. Elder Yang then introduced the next item, the marrow-cleansing pill, setting the starting price at 50,000 spirit stones and inviting bids. Bertu immediately offered 60,000. Yi Chen, surprised by the bid, questioned Bertu's interest in the pill, noting that his father had already provided him with one. Bertu explained that he intended to acquire the pill for his wife, prompting Yi Chen to express disbelief and curiosity regarding Bertu's marital status. Bertu responded dismissively, indicating that it was a personal matter. Another bidder soon offered 100,000 spirit stones, to which Bertu countered with 110,000. However, a subsequent bidder offered 150,000, causing Bertu to react in exaggerated frustration. He lamented that, despite having the means, the other bidder had deliberately chosen to compete against him. In response, Yi Chen attempted to console him, suggesting that if Bertu failed to obtain the marrow cleansing pill, he could perform the marrow cleansing himself. When questioned on his ability, Yi Chen confidently asserted that he could use true fire to perform the procedure, which he claimed would be even more effective than the pill. Bertu responded with admiration and appreciation, indicating approval with a double thumbs-up gesture. At that moment, Elder Yang presented a new item. As he raised the box, it became enveloped in a vortex of light and began to float. He announced the item as the heavenly immortal pill, explaining that it possessed the potential to assist cultivators in breaking through to the heavenly immortal stage, though the success of such a breakthrough would ultimately depend on the individual's own fortune. The gathered bidders responded with visible excitement, expressing anticipation for the long-awaited item. Elder Yang announced the commencement of bidding for the heavenly immortal pill, stating that the starting price would be 500,000 spirit stones, with a minimum increment of 10,000 spirit stones required for each subsequent bid. The bidders initially reacted with astonishment and disbelief at the high starting price. Nonetheless, the bidding began almost immediately, with offers rapidly increasing to 550,000, 600,000, and then 800,000 spirit stones. Some among the bidders expressed disdain at the current price, questioning the feasibility of acquiring the heavenly immortal pill for merely 800,000. Higher bids quickly followed: 1,000,000, 1,100,000, 1,300,000, and then a sharp jump to 2,000,000 spirit stones. Beartooth, visibly shocked, remarked that 2,000,000 spirit stones could form a small mountain if physically accumulated. Yi Chen speculated that, given the pace and scale of the bidding, it was likely that a minimum of 8,000,000 spirit stones would be required to secure the pill. He further noted that the major families and sect powerhouses had not yet entered the bidding, and they would constitute the primary competition moving forward. Bidding intensified further with offers of 2,300,000, 2,500,000, and a sudden leap to 5,000,000 spirit stones. Beartooth reacted with alarm at the staggering amount, while Yi Chen attempted to calm him, suggesting it might be a bid from Beartooth's own Xiang family. Internally, Yi Chen concluded that the major families had indeed begun to act. The bidding escalated to 5,500,000, then 6,000,000, and subsequently 6,500,000. Beartooth, increasingly anxious, expressed concern that the Xiang family could not sustain such a financial burden. Yi Chen countered that the Xiang family ought to be capable of covering the current bid. Beartooth acknowledged this, but explained that securing the heavenly immortal pill at such a price would effectively deplete the family's assets. He emphasized that acquiring the pill was inherently a gamble. Elder Yang had already clarified that the pill did not guarantee a breakthrough to the heavenly immortal stage. Success was uncertain and dependent on fortune. Beartooth added that even if the pill were successfully obtained, transporting it safely presented its own risks, and the desired breakthrough might not occur even under ideal circumstances. These concerns were quietly noted by the black-robed elder who had remained silent thus far. Bidding continued to climb, reaching 7,000,000, 7,500,000, and eventually 8,000,000. Yi Chen, observing the trend, inferred that the wealth of the three great sects and the bloodthirsty hall was now in play, and that the bidding would soon reach its conclusion. When the bidding reached 9,500,000, Elder Yang asked whether any further bids would be made. Yi Chen and Beartooth remained silent, assuming the auction had concluded. However, both were taken by surprise when the black-robed elder, seated at another table, offered a new bid of 10,000,000 spirit stones. Yi Chen, taken aback, wondered internally which powerhouse, among the three great sects or the bloodthirsty hall, this individual might represent.